The United States has printed more money in the last 15 years than in the entire previous century. Its debt just crossed $39 trillion. Its currency should be worthless. Instead, it's still the only thing the world actually accepts. Here's why. Your mortgage rate is lower than it should be. The gas in your car is cheaper than it would otherwise be. The phone in your hand crossed 3 oceans at a price that defied logic. None of that happened by accident. It happened because of a quiet deal made in a Saudi palace in 1974 that nobody taught you about in school. In 1965, France's finance minister, who would later become president, watched America run deficits that would have destroyed any other country's currency and called it an exorbitant privilege. He was right. He was also complaining in francs. The franc no longer exists. The dollar does. To understand why the dollar hasn't collapsed, you first have to understand the moment it nearly did. After World War II, the global financial system ran on one rule. The US dollar was pegged to gold at $35 an ounce, and every other currency was pegged to the dollar. It was clean, simple, and backed by something real. If you doubted America's promises, you could literally convert your dollars to gold. That convertibility wasn't symbolic, it was enforcement. Then America fought Korea, then Vietnam, built a welfare state and a space program at the same time, and printed money for all of it. By 1971, foreign governments did the math and started getting nervous. France asked for its gold. Britain asked, Germany asked. Switzerland, a country whose entire national identity is built around quietly holding other people's wealth, asked. When Switzerland is knocking on your door, you've gone past embarrassing. Nixon's answer: he closed the gold window on a Sunday evening while most of America was watching television. No more gold for dollars. A promise replaced by nothing but the next promise. Here is what Nixon had just done. He told the world, the dollar is no longer backed by gold. Trust us anyway. And he said it to countries that had just watched him break the previous trust promise. The dollar needed a new reason to exist. Fast. Henry Kissinger had 3 years to find the answer. He found it in the desert. In 1974, Kissinger flew to Saudi Arabia and made a deal that has quietly run the global financial system ever since. The terms were straightforward. Saudi Arabia and OPEC would price and sell oil exclusively in US dollars. In return, America would provide military protection, weapons, a permanent presence in the Gulf, a guarantee that anyone touching Saudi Arabia would deal with the United States first. The logic was brutal in its elegance. Every country on Earth burns oil every single day. Every country that wants oil must first acquire US dollars. Japan wants oil, dollars first. Germany wants oil, dollars first. India, South Korea, Brazil, all of them every day, permanently in the market buying dollars just to keep their factories running and their lights on. With one deal, America had created permanent, inescapable global demand for its currency. Not because the dollar was backed by gold, because it was backed by something you couldn't store in a vault, couldn't print a substitute for, and couldn't live without. That's the petrodollar system. Let's make this land in your daily life. Think about the last time you filled up your car. That fuel crossed oceans, passed through financial systems, and was priced, traded, and settled in dollars before a single drop reached your tank. Even if you live nowhere near America. Or think about a container ship leaving Shanghai loaded with electronics. The fuel powering that ship was purchased in dollars. The insurance underwriting its route is priced off dollar benchmarks. The port fees at the other end are settled in dollars. You bought the product in your local currency. But dollars touched every step before it reached you. That's not coincidence. That's architecture. An entire global system designed so that every transaction eventually routes through the dollar. Here's the mechanism that makes the whole thing self-reinforcing. Oil exporters, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, Kuwait, suddenly had a specific kind of problem. More dollars coming in than they could spend domestically. Saudi Arabia didn't need $135 billion in its domestic economy. So where did the surplus go? Back to America. Into US Treasury bonds, US banks, US financial markets. This is called petrodollar recycling. The world buys oil in dollars. The oil exporters park those dollars in US government debt. America borrows that money back at lower rates than it would otherwise pay, then uses some of it to fund the military that protects the oil fields that keep the system running. A loop so elegant it looks accidental. It wasn't. Here's where the story gets uncomfortable. In 2022, America froze nearly $300 billion in Russian foreign reserves and cut Russian banks from the global payment system overnight. It worked as a weapon, but every other government watching, including America's closest economic partners, quietly updated the same calculation. These reserves are only mine as long as Washington says they are. That sentence changed the math. Since 2022, 3 simultaneous pressures have been building against the system. First, America became a net energy exporter in the late 2010 seconds. The original petrodollar deal was symmetrical. You price in our currency, we buy your oil, we protect your routes. Today, America is still protecting supply routes it no longer personally needs. The invoice and the benefit have separated. Saudi Arabia noticed. When Saudi Arabia notices something, it doesn't post about it, it diversifies. Second, China is now Saudi Arabia's largest oil customer. China wants to settle some shipments in yuan. The quiet negotiation over that shift is happening right now, in meetings that don't make headlines until they're done. Third, roughly 1 in 5 cars sold globally in 2025 was electric, and that share is rising. The petrodollar was built on one assumption: oil is essential every single day. The day that assumption weakens, the entire deal needs renegotiation. So why hasn't the dollar collapsed despite $39 trillion in debt, decades of printing, and visible cracks in the petrodollar system? Despite $39 trillion in debt, decades of printing, and visible cracks in the petrodollar system? Because the dollar isn't competing as a currency anymore, it's operating as infrastructure. Because the dollar isn't competing as a currency anymore, it's operating as infrastructure. The euro has a stagnant growth engine. The yen is fighting a demographic collapse. The euro has a stagnant growth engine. The yen is fighting a demographic collapse. The yuan has capital controls that make institutional investors nervous about parking long-term savings in it. In a world where every currency has serious structural problems, markets don't look for perfect. They look for least broken. More importantly, replacing the dollar isn't like switching apps on your phone. It's rebuilding the financial internet. Every bank, every oil contract, every sovereign wealth fund, every trade finance system, all simultaneously. The last time the world changed its reserve currency, it took 2 world wars and the complete economic collapse of the previous dominant power. Nobody is planning 2 world wars. The dollar survives by default. Here's the precise framing that matters. The dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves has fallen from 71% in 1999 to roughly 57% today. That is not a collapse. It is a slow, steady, one-directional leak. Compression, not implosion. What that compression means practically: rates drift slightly higher than they would in a fully dominant dollar world. Deficits get marginally more expensive to run. The margin for error thins. America can still borrow cheaply, just not as cheaply as before. The privilege is exorbitant. It's just becoming slightly less exorbitant every year. Here's the question worth sitting with. The petrodollar system was built in 1974 without your knowledge, maintained for 50 years without your vote, and is being quietly renegotiated right now. In finance ministries in Riyadh, in infrastructure meetings in Beijing, on tanker bridges in the Strait of Hormuz. Every mortgage rate, every shipping cost, every price on every shelf has been shaped by this system. The dollar hasn't collapsed because nothing better has been built yet. When something better gets built, that's when the answer changes.